Welcome to a new chapter in the Accounting Arc podcast, an exciting series of student-led conversations, ARC style. Get ready for fresh insights, bold ideas, and new perspectives. In this episode, we're passing the mic to a bright student interviewer who's sitting down with leading accounting professionals. Whether you're a student exploring career paths, a seasoned pro looking for inspiration, or just curious about the future of the accounting profession, this episode is for you.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Accounting Arc Student-Led Conversations, where we explore big ideas through student voices. I'm your host, Arpan Grewal, and today we're bringing you a special Earth Day episode that dives into something you might not expect to connect with sustainability: accounting. You heard that right, accounting. We're talking about how the world of numbers, finance, and reporting is actually playing a huge role in tackling real-world issues like climate change, social justice, and responsible business practices. And to help us understand how, we've got a wonderful guest joining us, Tiffany Huey, an advisory senior with BPM, a firm that is embracing a bold vision of driving innovation, transformation, and success for the future. I also hear you're somewhat of a rock star in the ESG world. So what do you say we get into it? Welcome to the podcast, Tiffany.
Amazing. It's great to be here. Glad you hear that. And thank you so much for having me.
Of course. To kick things off, could you share a little bit about yourself and what first got you interested in accounting, and how did you find your way into ESG work?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, very unrelated to accounting, is actually in education and nonprofit work. I spent a lot of time working with kids, families, community members, doing youth programming and community-based initiatives. I've always very, very deeply cared about social impact, equity, and the kind of change that starts really on the ground. But over time, I kind of started to feel this pull to zoom out and look at how change happens on a systems level. So, how are big decisions getting made? Who is influencing policy? How are businesses allocating their resources, right? We see today that businesses have a huge impact on our environment, if not the most. And could those decisions be better for both people and the planet? So that curiosity really led me down the path of going back to school and getting my MBA in sustainability. I wanted to learn how to speak the language of business. It's not something I had any experience in before. So things like how to navigate strategy, operations, finance, but really through a values-aligned lens. And so,
That's amazing.
thank you. But that's like really how I found my way into ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance work. And it's this space that really connects purpose and profit, where I get to help companies understand their impact and think more holistically about how they operate. So I've worked across ESG strategy and reporting, as well as carbon accounting, which is the part that brings the accounting and sustainability together.
Yeah.
And in that process, I'm almost there, I promise. In that process, what surprised me is how big a role accounting can play in that, because at the end of the day, what companies measure and how they report it really tells the story of what they value. So as you mentioned, I currently lead the ESG advisory practice at BPM. We are a top 35 accounting and advisory firm based in San Francisco. And I'll wrap it up with this. For me, there's something really full circle about that. My family immigrated to the US from the Philippines. And my grandpa, who brought my mom and the rest of their family here, worked as an accountant for Big Oil at Mobil. So now for me to be leading ESG and sustainability work at an accounting firm, helping companies take responsibility for their environmental and social impacts is kind of wild in the best way. And it's this intersection of, legacy and purpose and systems change that makes me feel really lucky to be here.
Wow, I love that. That is such a great introduction. Thank you. So you've said impact a few times, and most people think that accounting is just numbers. How does ESG connect with the real world change?
Yeah, people definitely think numbers and spreadsheets when they hear the word accounting, which, yeah, of course, accounting is really about telling the story of what matters to a business. But ESG accounting really just shifts the focus. So instead of only asking, how much money did we make as a company, it also asks questions like, what kind of impact are we having on people on the planet? Or where are we creating waste or missing opportunities to improve? So that could mean things like tracking your greenhouse gas emissions, your energy usage, your workforce diversity, or how ethically your suppliers are operating.
Mhm.
And I mentioned this earlier, but when you start measuring those things, you start making better decisions because you can't, again, fix what you don't track.
Yeah.
Um, and I'd also argue that ESG is both qualitative and quantitative in nature. ESG was actually born in the investment world. It was a way for investors to get a more comprehensive, quote unquote, non-financial understanding of a company's risks and opportunities. And I remember the first thing I learned from my accounting professor in grad school was that accounting is really just storytelling. And I appreciate that ESG helps to create a more complete story about how a company is operating.
So you previously mentioned that you lead the ESG practice at BPM, which is a significant role in a large accounting and advisory firm, but you don't actually come from an accounting background. I find that really fascinating. Could you share a bit more about how you found your way into this profession and how you're making an impact without the traditional accounting path?
Yeah, so a lot of CPA firms today have their ESG practices kind of positioned differently. I've met folks that lead ESG practices at Big Four who are coming at it from the tax angle, right? You're looking at tax credits related to sustainability. Some of them are coming at it from the assurance angle. So they're looking at ESG, assurance over ESG data or assurance over greenhouse gas emissions data. BPM had found me wanting to come at ESG from the advisory angle, right? So they had brought me in to build up really our entire practice, starting with materiality, because a lot of companies that are going through this work for the first time are focused on like, what is ESG? Where do we start? What do we do first? And that initial process is often through identifying what is actually material to your company,
Mhm.
both from a business lens and from a stakeholder priority lens. And so I think all of my community work, and work in education, work in um, just like community-based programs really helped with that stakeholder management role.
Mhm.
And it truly is like an advisory position where you are managing multiple stakeholders, decision makers across an organization. And so that obviously didn't require the accounting background, but there's a lot that I'm learning along the way about the accounting side of it.
Yeah, I love that. So, can you break down some of that for us in high school that might not know a lot about ESG? Like your whole pathway and the journey and what you did to get there?
So when I was working in, I guess I'll take a big step back. When I was working in the nonprofit space, I was leading programs in uh, education, social entrepreneurship, uh, public health, and in all of that work, I just kept asking, like, why is this so wasteful? Not to say that there's anything wrong with the nonprofit space, but I thought that there had to be a more sustainable way to approach impact, which was what led me to get my MBA in sustainability. And at the time that I went into this MBA program, no other business programs were talking about sustainability. None of them were talking about impact. And so I was like, this is it. Like this is what I need to do. And that entire program just reshaped the way that I think about systems, about institutions, about the purpose that business exists. And from there, I, let's see, from there, I got into the corporate ESG consulting space. And so this is, pre-2020, pre-COVID, pre-George Floyd, companies were already starting to ask the question, how do we not only improve how we operate as a company, but how do we really live our values? And so at the time that I was starting in this space, we were trying to answer that question for I was working with a lot of large tech companies, and I think tech really spearheaded this space at that time and decided that they were going to be the ones that were going to step up and say that like our values as a company matters. And we know that we have an impact on the communities that, we operate in. And from there, I learned, ESG materiality, ESG strategy development, ESG reporting for the sake of even like compliance, which is a growing space. And then in that work, I'm sure you've seen that carbon accounting is kind of now the crux of a lot of the regulatory landscape. And so because that piece of ESG and sustainability has kind of taken over, not in a bad way. I've, learned and grown in that space, and it has meant that there's much more of an angle or a leadership position for CPAs and CPA firms to take in that.
Yes.
I will note that I am not a CPA though.
So it sounds like you have a passion for business success, environment, strategy, and things in this space. They sound like there are ways that students in areas like science, arts, or tech can play a role in ESG work. Am I hearing that from what you've shared?
Absolutely.
Could you further explain how students that may be involved in those interests can get involved into ESG work?
Yeah, so this actually might be a good time to differentiate ESG and environmental sustainability. So people tend to use ESG very interchangeably, but ESG at its core is a framework used to assess a company's quote unquote, non-financial performance and ethical practices. And so when we talk about like numbers in ESG, I think more of environmental sustainability because that's where we get into carbon accounting, which is also referred to as measuring your carbon footprint. And that process is very data-driven and numbers-based. But in all of my ESG work, so much more of that has been about understanding the priorities of internal and external stakeholders. And that's what I was mentioning earlier, right? So what this looks like in practice is I actually spend more of my days in one-on-one meetings, but also group calls with people at a company who are in, HR, operations, facilities, finance, legal, compliance, marketing, you name it. And my job has often been to get them on the same page, more or less, and make sure that we're all heading in the same direction. So if you are a numbers person or not a numbers person, if you are really good at managing relationships, if you are really persuasive, if you, there are just like so many skill sets that go into this work that are not necessarily related to accounting. And I think this space in general truly needs all of us. And so whether you are the artist, whether you are the engineer or the coder or whatever it may be, I think there's absolutely space in ESG and social justice and climate action for everybody.
So would you say that ESG is more of like a mindset than just a career path?
I would say so.
Okay. And you mentioned that the ESG field needs more people in it and needs students like me to really get into those fields. Why do you think ESG matters for our generation, especially as we face climate change and social issues?
Oh man, the hard-hitting questions. I think your generation is not walking into anything even remotely easy. You're walking into insane challenges. I just think about even existing in today's political climate. It's
Yeah.
insane. But things from climate change to social injustice, I think your generation understands that full context more than
Mhm.
any other before you. And I couldn't imagine conducting an interview on this topic for a podcast as a
Mhm.
student like you. So kudos to you, Arpan. Um, but what I love about ESG is that it gives you a toolkit to do something about it. So instead of just protesting or reacting,
Mhm.
not that there's anything wrong with those. I think we need everyone out there playing their part. But
Mhm.
ESG means that you can actually help shape how organizations behave. ESG is also, um, to me, the only role that I've seen that sits across every department or function at a company. I mentioned this earlier, but there are truly ways to create change through an ESG lens in any role. So,
Mhm.
for example, maybe you work in facilities and you're focused on transitioning your company's
Mhm.
buildings to renewable energy. Maybe, you're in HR and you're focused on ensuring people of any background have equitable opportunities in hiring or promotions, right?
Yeah.
So I think your generation is already doing the work and you're questioning the
Mhm.
systems and the institutions. You're calling it out like you see it.
Mhm.
You're holding companies accountable if
Yeah.
they're not walking the talk. Um, and I think ESG just helps to set a foundation for identifying good and bad actors. And I think that's
Mhm.
super empowering.
Yeah, and I personally think that what shifted in our generation for us to become more aware about that stuff was the COVID lockdown. I
Hmm.
mean, during that time, we became more aware of what was going on in our environment, in our world, and social issues, and it made us more involved with getting into nonprofits and social movements. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. That was
So,
actually, this is a little
yeah.
personal. Um, I actually had my son after the COVID lockdowns, after all
Hmm.
of the George Floyd protests, um, because it was a time in history that I was like, everyone is insanely fired up. Everyone
Yeah.
believes in change. Um, we're just kind of like a clean slate right now,
Yeah.
and we really get to decide what happens next for all of
Hmm.
us.
Yeah. And because of that, I would say a lot of us in high school are super passionate about things like the environment, equity, and social justice, but it's not always clear how accounting really fits into that. So how does ESG accounting actually help move the needle on those issues?
I think it's one thing for a company to say, we care about the environment, right? Companies have been saying that for forever.
Mm-hmm.
But ESG actually makes them show us the receipt.
Mm-hmm.
When you start tracking your emissions, your diversity numbers, your labor practices, that kind of transparency, I think we all like to believe creates accountability. And once those numbers are out there, customers notice, investors notice, employees notice. And I think that pressure really matters.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a lot of ESG work where the only thing that triggered the ESG work was one or two board members coming to the executive leadership and saying, hey, have you heard of this? This matters. We need to
Yeah.
move on it. And it changed the entire trajectory of their company and their impact work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've seen companies, change policies, switch their suppliers, or cut emissions because of what they learned from
Mm-hmm.
their, ESG tracking and their ESG reporting.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that more and more regulations are starting to require this level of
Mm-hmm.
transparency, right? Not just measuring
Yeah.
carbon emissions, but actually getting that data audited in
Mm-hmm.
the same way that financial statements are audited. Again,
Yeah.
not an auditor, so I won't pretend like
Yeah.
I'm an expert in that space. But some companies are even going a step further and voluntarily getting all of their ESG data audited. And that's
Mm-hmm.
them saying, we're serious about this and we want our stakeholders to trust what we're reporting.
They're
And
showing the
so,
receipts.
yeah, absolutely showing the receipts. And if for any students that are interested in going
Mm-hmm.
into accounting and audit, like this is an important space. Hold
Mm-hmm.
companies accountable. This, I think, our regulations or our regulatory landscape will continue
Mm-hmm.
moving in that direction.
Yeah. And I feel like students have been holding companies accountable, especially with the increase of cancel culture and
Oh my
social
goodness.
media.
I'm so terrified of your generation in a good way.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I am too. I mean, it's so easy to watch a company be at the highest of its industry and then be brought down to the bottom and be
Like
completely forgotten
overnight
about
too.
overnight.
Those
So,
receipts are important.
yeah. So you're talking about getting students involved into ESG. So if a student wanted to start an ESG conversation at their school, what would be a good first step?
I always say start small and start where you are. You don't need, a big budget or some sort of overthought and fancy plan.
Hmm.
Just ask, how can our school be more thoughtful about people and the planet? And that might mean something from, clothing swaps instead of buying more fast fashion. It
Hmm.
might be, looking at how much plastic waste is coming out of the school or talking to the school board about solar panels or what kinds of buses the district is using.
Hmm.
Um, I actually have a fun story. So when I was in high school, I took an AP Environmental Science class,
Hmm.
and our final project was to choose an environmental issue to tackle. And our school, I went to a huge high school. We were over 3,000 students. And my class picked something that honestly seemed kind of silly at first. It was
Hmm.
replacing paper towels in the bathrooms with hand dryers.
Hmm.
A long time ago, so maybe everyone's more progressive now. Um, but once we started looking at the data, it blew my mind. Janitors were, emptying overflowing trash cans every hour.
Hmm.
The school was spending thousands of dollars a year on paper towels, and those paper towels weren't just trees; they were also requiring tons of water and bleach to
Yeah.
produce, and we had to ship them in constantly. So we
Hmm.
had put together our findings, presented them to the school and district leadership, and they actually approved it and actually made the change immediately afterwards. And that was the first time I really understood how sustainability could be super practical
Yeah.
and how student voices can move the needle. So I think the changes that we think of as sustainability just make good business sense,
Hmm.
and none of it needs to be overthought. If
Yeah.
a student is passionate about something, freaking go for it.
Yeah. No, I can testify for that paper towel thing because I when I used to go to public high school, it was like there was like a lot of us. And when I tell you, I never saw a trash can in a bathroom that wasn't overflowing with paper
Oh my
towels and
goodness.
they were all over the ground. And I was like,
It's
this
awful.
cannot be good.
But when we made the change, people were so upset. People love their paper towels, but
Yeah.
I have no qualms about taking that away from people.
Yeah. Well, hopefully more schools progress.
Oh my God, it's such a waste of money.
It is. And more work for the janitors.
Right. They could be
Yeah.
doing better things,
Yeah.
more useful things.
Okay, Tiffany, time for a quick rapid fire round. Just say the first thing that comes to mind. Ready?
No. Okay, okay.
Favorite sustainable brand?
Oh gosh. Um, this company actually isn't here anymore, but it was one of my favorite wardrobe capsule companies
Hmm.
called Vetta, Vetta,
Hmm.
Vetta. And they sold clothing pieces that were like sets of five that you could wear in
Yeah,
different outfits all month long. Sorry,
I
that was
love
not one
that.
word.
No, you're good. I went to LA recently and I saw so many new sustainable clothing brands. So I think we're really
Ooh,
progressing on that movement.
I love that.
Yeah. So first job ever.
Um, my first like under the table job, I was tutoring a middle schooler in high school, but my first like on paper job, I was this quote unquote sandwich artist at Subway.
One thing high schoolers should look into this Earth Day.
Ooh, um, zero waste tips.
I love that. Favorite thing about working in ESG.
The different kinds of people I get to meet and work with because they come from every department, every function, and they all are super excited about learning about ESG for the first time.
Most unexpected part of your job.
Ooh, There are way more spreadsheets than I expected.
Book, podcast, or movie that inspired you around sustainability.
This is less sustainability and more business innovation, but
Mm-hmm.
I've always loved How I Built This with Guy
Mm-hmm.
Raz.
I watched that before. Might have to now.
Oh my gosh, it's the best. Super inspiring.
If you weren't in accounting, what would you be doing?
Ooh, I'd probably be in the nonprofit space still.
I love that. One daily habit you try to follow to live more sustainability.
Ooh, so many. Making a lot of my food from scratch at home. I am one of those people that started growing all my own vegetables at
Mm-hmm.
home, started making my own sourdough bread.
Yeah,
Had to jump on that bandwagon.
I might need to start doing that.
Highly recommend.
Best advice you've ever received.
Ooh. Um, Kind of cliche, but everything is temporary. I
Mm-hmm.
think when you work in sustainability, there's a need to accept that things are constantly changing very quickly and that there will always be new, issues that arise. There's no shortage of like causes to focus on and care about.
Mm-hmm. This one's a random one, but what is your favorite food?
Oh gosh. I totally just enjoyed a California burrito before this
Mm-hmm.
podcast, so I'm gonna have to choose that.
Yeah. One word that describes how you feel about the future.
Ooh. Uh, Hopeful.
I love that. So before we go back to the questions, is there any rapid fire questions you want to throw my way?
Ooh. Let's see.
Okay.
If you have one.
Okay.
Most overused buzzword in ESG for sustainability.
Mm, probably reuse.
Ooh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Any myths that you would debunk?
Any myths? I don't know.
That's okay. What
Yeah.
about the most underrated way to help the planet?
Most under. Mm, probably. I've seen a lot of articles about this, but using less AI.
Ooh, girl, you're
Yeah.
progressive. I've had colleagues come to me at work and say, should I feel guilty about using AI?
Yeah.
I think we should also put that back on the
Yeah.
AI companies, though. They need
Yeah.
to figure it out.
No, I was scrolling through my phone today and I saw one that was like, it's costing like AI companies millions of dollars if you respond back with thank you or please when asking a question.
That's so funny. I'm very good about saying please and thank yous because
Hmm.
when they take over, I don't want to be the first one they get.
Yeah. And they're like telling you, don't use your manners anymore. Just be straight and direct with it.
You're gonna need to send that to me.
Well, do you have any more questions?
Ooh, let's see. Okay, last one.
Okay.
One thing people should stop doing for the environment's sake.
Mm, this one goes out to a lot of the celebrities, probably because I just recently visited LA, but the increase in use of private jets, if it's like a 40-minute or like 30-minute flight.
Oh my gosh, cut private jets
Yeah.
completely. And Trips to Space by Katy Perry.
Well, that was great. Thank you. This has been an amazing conversation, Tiffany, and I really appreciate you being on today's podcast.
So excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I love that you are doing this.
Thank you. So I know we're running out of time, but before we go, I'd like to ask you, what is one piece of advice you'd give to any student who wants to combine their passions with purpose, no matter their major or future job?
I'm going to keep this short and sweet. and I will stand by this piece of advice forever. And it's, you do not have to choose between making a living and making a difference.
I love that. Thank you, Tiffany, for joining us on today's Earth Day special episode of the Accounting Arc Student-Led Conversations. I've learned quite a bit from our conversation today, and I feel like our listeners will take away so much from this conversation. I also want to thank everyone who tuned in today, and I hope that if you're like me, you've had some aha moments about what we can do to be a part of the solution. That's it for today's episode of the Accounting Arc Student-Led Conversations. If you've enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to subscribe, share, and join us next time for more insightful conversations. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep making impact. See you next time.
The Center for Accounting Transformation provides business professionals with a network for utilizing innovations that are ready for adoption, the training and resources necessary to apply those innovations, and an opportunity to engage the talent and community needed to further the pursuit of innovative accounting practices that drive responsible and mindful business performance. If you'd like to learn more about our Agents of Transformation campaign or share your own story, please visit our website, www.we.improvetheworld.net, and unlock the power of the accounting profession. And if you'd like to apply to be a student host on a future episode, email us at agents@improvetheworld.net.